Okay, so this is now the 5th episode of our discussion of Crime and Punishment. I almost said Pride and Prejudice there, of Crime and Punishment. Yeah, as with the last one, I don't think we need to explain what this is. If anyone starts in episode 5, you only have yourself to blame. Start with episode 1. By the way, Antonia, today I think was my record for finishing reading the part latest to our recording, because I literally finished reading this 15 minutes ago.
Well, you did finish it. That's all.
Yes, I finished it, and yeah. But this is unusual because, like, in the first 3 episodes, I think I finished reading it a few days before the recording, so I had a bit of like distance to it, which can be good, because you can look at it more from the bird's eye perspective, maybe. But then you also forget details. Whereas right now, I've got the details all in my head, I hope. So yeah, we'll see. So anyway, as always, I think I wrote down a brief summary. So I'm going to briefly remind everyone of what happened in the 5 chapters. Chapter 1, for some reason, is from Lucien's perspective, which is something new. But Lucien gives Sonia 10 rubles and suggests to help her and her family financially. Then this guy, Lebeziatnikov, or however you pronounce his name, and Lucien talk quite a lot. And at the end, then Lucien seems to plan something. At least that's what Lebeziatnikov thinks, even though he, at the time, doesn't know what. Then chapter 2, we're at the funeral banquet of Marmeladov. To prove how noble Katerina Ivanovna is, she basically insults half of her guests and keeps saying how great her heritage is. Raskolnikov didn't say anything in the entire chapter, even though he sat there for about half of it. Chapter 3, Lucien arrives at the banquet and accuses Sonia of stealing 100 rubles from him. Then Lebeziatnikov and Raskolnikov accuse Lucien of planting the money in Sonia's pocket so that Raskolnikov looks bad for associating with Sonia, and therefore Lucien looks better for starting a fight with Raskolnikov and can maybe get back together with Raskolnikov's sister. Chapter 4 is now the big one, I think. Raskolnikov tells Sonia that he killed the 2 women, and they discuss his motives for doing so. Raskolnikov and Sonia then basically decide to be together, as you do. And then Lebeziatnikov enters. And chapter 5, then basically Katerina Ivanovna is just going complete insane and makes a huge scene in the streets where she basically forces her crying children to sing and dance some stuff so they can basically earn money. And when she falls, she just seems to be basically dying from her consumption. And then everyone congregates in Sonia's room, at which point Svidrigailov turns up and says, oh yeah, 2 things, Raskolnikov. Number 1, I'll pay for the funeral and I'll make sure the children are fine. Oh, and by the way, I heard your confession to Sonia that you killed them. And that's the end of part 5. Once again, sorry, I already said this last time, but there's too many names in this book.
Yeah.
I keep having to look up who is who. It's just so bad. Also, there's 4 Ivanovnas. I just realized it's too many.
I agree. What did you think about this part?
In a way, I feel like it's very similar to the previous parts in terms of how I liked it, in that it always starts off with a lot of talking.
That's
and
right.
People being really annoying. It's just people, again, like, I'll get to that a bit more later, but again, most people here are not likable characters, and they just talk such nonsense the entire time and just so obnoxious. But then he usually ends the parts really well by really advancing the plot and ending on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it very much had the same feeling, especially the beginning, with Lucien just talking and with his flatmate, and it just didn't progress. It was page after page. And I was like, where is this leading and why is this relevant? Yeah. In hindsight, you know why it's relevant, but yeah, it was definitely a slow start, and then it picked up quite a lot towards the end, and then obviously ends with a cliffhanger. So
yeah, but also the whole, I mean, So, I think we talked about it last time or the time before, something that basically no one is likable in this book, almost no one. And I always felt like Katarina Ivanovna was a kind of medium case, where it's a tough life, right? If you basically have to, if your husband, as should we say, from the way she was described in the first few parts, it seemed to me like she actually got really unlucky, basically, kind of that her husband turned out to be such a drunk and then basically lost everything the family had and what she and he had been working for, and that she really got the bad end of the stick. But in this part, she's just so obnoxious the entire time. I mean, sure, she's upset because it's her husband's funeral, and no one of the people she hoped would turn up turned up, and only the poor people came. But that whole thing's kind of part of the problem. She's just such an arrogant. She's just so like, I'm above everyone here.
Although I did have the impression early on in the previous parts that she was not a very kind and caring character, because in the end of the day, I think it was her who made Sonia leave the home because she didn't want Sonia to be in the family home anymore.
But I don't know. Somehow, this was the first part where I really thought like, oh God. Yeah, I mean, this is a general thing that I realized. There's quite a lot of talk about some people being superior to others in this part. And I guess it's kind of already there in the previous ones, or maybe in general in this book. So there's this whole discussion that Raskolnikov and Porfiry Petrovich had about the article that Raskolnikov wrote, right? That some people should be allowed to do certain things or that kind of thing. That some people are above others. And there's here also this whole thing where in this part, when talking to Sonia, he talks about how he wanted to test whether he was like a real human or just what's the term they use? Not a roach, but a leech? No, some sort of insect or something. And then also it occurred to me that the whole thing about Katerina Ivanovna is that she feels like she always said like, oh, I'm from a noble family. I'm better than these people. This shouldn't happen to me. I'm not poor and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it only occurred to me like when these two parts were kind of back to back, that there's actually quite a bit of discussion here. Well, not necessarily discussion, but a lot of the characters seem to think that they're kind of above everyone else.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a bit of a theme of the book, isn't it? The question whether some people are allowed to do certain actions, whether it's justified to do certain things when you're a certain person. So I can see that.
And it seems that Dostoevsky does not think that that's the case, because the people who make those arguments seem to make some pretty poor decisions.
That's true.
I mean, for example, the whole thing with Razumikin or whatever, right? He seems to be like one of the kindest characters in the books. You never hear him go, oh, I'm such a great person or whatever. Like, he just seems to try and help.
True. So what did you think of the confession scene or chapter?
Let me just check my notes there.
Because previously we've been discussing his motives, or also I think last time we discussed, maybe the time before, whether we asked whether he felt sorry for it, whether what his motives were, whether he regrets the action, etc. And I think there's some definitely, it's the first time actually we hear him talk about it and his reasoning or rationale behind killing.
Well, that's the question, though, right? I mean, I know what you're getting at, like the whole thing. There's this passage I also wrote it out, where he says he did it all for himself or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't kill for my mother, I didn't kill for my sister or anything, I just killed. And I mean, the difficult part here to me is that this is something he's now saying a few days after the fact. Whereas, I think basically he's trying to come up with why he did it, and he's trying to figure out why he did it, and this is one interpretation. I don't know whether he believes it or...
That's interesting, because I didn't have the same impression. For me, it was very much linking back to the paper he's written, or the article he's written, about that some extraordinary people are allowed to do certain deeds or commit certain crimes, in order to do something, and the majority of the people, common people who are not extraordinary, are not allowed to do these things, and they have to abide by the law. And for me, this confession sounds like that he was indeed testing his assumption about himself that he was one of these extraordinary people, and this is why he kind of compared himself to Napoleon, or wanted to act in line with Napoleon, and just grab what he wants to reach a greater goal, which his idea is that he needs money to establish himself, and then he will become a great lawyer of some sort and go through university, etc. So he thinks this is the ultimate aim, which is worth killing for. But the whole action to me seems like he wanted to test this, or wanted to show that this is the case. Yeah, but after killing her, he realizes that he's not an extraordinary person, and he's not Napoleon, which is why he fell into despair after the murder.
I kind of agree and also not. So, I mean, yes, he says that, and he links it to those things. And from the way what he tells Zonya, it seems very much like that's the case. And it kind of fits to what he also, the discussion, that he had with Porfiry Petrovich. So that all makes sense. But again, he never thought about these things before he was doing the action. We saw we saw his actions and what he was thinking before he was doing it, and he never once thought about this. So I feel like if this really had been his motives, then why didn't we hear about this before?
But we don't really there's only so much we hear about his thoughts before the murder, and then it might be that, I think this whole idea of thinking or thought process started much earlier than the beginning of the book, right? We didn't really know about this article until part 3 or 4, I don't know. So it might be true. Maybe when the moment where the book starts is already way into this thought process, and maybe already at a stage where he's not very clear. But the way he describes it also, he talks about these days or weeks where he was just lying he had stopped studying but didn't really intend to work, but he was just lying in his flat or his room thinking. So we don't know anything about this period. And it could be that this is where he thought all this through. He came up with this idea.
So, I mean, I think the slight problem I have with that is not that it couldn't be the case, or that we know that it's not the case, or whatever. I mean, I think as we discussed in part 1, it's very, or part 1 or part 2, we really don't know his motives, right? It's very, I think in part 1, it's not super clearly defined why he does it or whatnot. And I understand that, that the Dostoevsky structure of the book, that it kind of starts with a lot of action, right? It doesn't start with Raskolnikov lying in his bed for months. It starts with the crime, more or less. And so I stand from a dramatic perspective, it makes sense to start with the crime and not have all this build up to it, right? That makes complete sense to me, and I think is a good dramatic choice. But I think, and I'm not saying obviously he did think about these things before, and he did write that article, and I guess my point is more he had those thoughts before, but then when he actually committed the action, he seemed largely devoid of it. It seemed to me he was more focused on the money before he did it. If I remember correctly, in part 1, I think it was more he was just, in part 1, I got the impression he was just poor and wanted money. Now in part 5, now he actively disagrees with that and says it wasn't for the money. I haven't even taken any of the money. I haven't done this or that. But I just don't buy it, really, to be honest. I feel like he's had these thoughts, and for some reason he killed her, but it's just very unclear why he did what he did.
So do you think that he's lying to Sonia, or is he himself trying to make sense of his actions in hindsight in a way, and kind of explaining his own actions?
I think it's more the latter. I don't think he's lying. I think he's just, for most of the book, he's just completely confused about everything. he can't string two clear thoughts together. I think he's just very desperate. And I mean, also, like, as you said, like, he spent like months in his bed just lying around. Like, you're not thinking when you're lying in your bed for months. You're just ruminating. And like, if you want to like really figure something out, don't lie in your bed for several months and just not do anything all day. That's not how you gain clarity over something. I've tried. It doesn't work. He isn't thinking about it. Like, I think if he really had been the person who wanted to test this theory, the book would have been written very differently. I would have made him, like, at least it seems to me, if you really want to test this thing, because that would have been an interesting book too. You could have said something like, you have this very clear-minded guy who has this theory and tests it, and then goes through his psychological turmoil and realizes it doesn't work. And that can be a very interesting book in its way too. But it seems to me more he was just in turmoil the entire time, committed a murder during this, and is now going like, oh, maybe I was testing this theory, but I don't know. Yeah, he just doesn't seem clear enough in his mind for me for that to be the main reason.
But maybe it could have just been some set. I wonder whether you need to be clear to have sense of grandeur, because he could have just been like very manic in a sense that he felt like he was this extraordinary Napoleon-like person. And
yeah, and I mean that actually makes sense in terms of what I said earlier with Katerina Ivanovna, in that both her and, I mean, she really reverts to this whole I'm superior to everyone because my dad was whatever when she's most desperate. When she's really desperate, that's when she starts having this sense of grandiosity about herself. And it seems to me maybe that for Raskolnikov, it was the same thing, that he was getting really desperate and then came up with this whole thing, well, maybe I'm better than everyone else anyway. See what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's the case, but again, the thing that really, like, I think the first time we heard of this, in part one. So, I mean, in part one, if I remember correctly, the question of whether it's okay to murder someone kind of for the greater good, let's say, is already addressed, because Raskolnikov remembers overhearing a conversation between those two people in the pub, right? Where the one guy says like, well, this old lady is really mean. She has all this money. She doesn't use it. She abuses her sister, all that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So we already had a glimpse into that this is a theme, or that these might be some motives that go through Raskolnikov's head. But we never had this whole thing about whether he's superior or not in part one. Like, yeah, I feel like it should have been mentioned in part one if that was really part of his thinking at the time. I think at the time he just wanted, I don't know, resentful, angry at being poor or whatever. I don't know.
But then that brings back the question, why didn't he work? If he was only desperate, because there's never really a clear reason for why he didn't look for some sort of employment. So
because he thinks it's below him, or? Yeah.
Because the problem of poverty might have been solved differently.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. To me, it's just completely unclear why he killed them.
Well, I guess maybe it could also be a combination of both, right? So he was in a desperate situation. He needed the money, but also he felt like he was superior. He deserved better life. He had some sort of vision, what he wanted to do. And he felt like he could be a Napoleon, and then did it. So
yeah, I mean, maybe maybe the frustration that he felt came from the fact that he thought, this shouldn't happen to me. Like, I'm not the person who should be in this situation, who has to like teach to gain his money or whatever. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not part of the, I mean, like, every decision, especially if it's about a big topic, is very complex and involves lots of moving parts. But I think one point is more that I think he makes it a bit too easy for himself.
Yeah.
Although maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I think now I'm getting as confused as he is. So I'm probably going to go kill some old ladies.
Yeah. Do you also, when reading this part about his confession, find it very strange that he talked about the murders if he'd only murdered the pawnbroker and not Elisaveta, the sister?
Wait, so again, you said it sounds like he only killed the pawnbroker.
Yeah, he talked about the murders if he'd only killed one person.
But he does start off, I don't know, in the beginning I had the opposite, that I thought he only talked about killing Elisaveta. Because he said, like, because, you know, the whole confession kind of started off by him saying, like, oh yeah, by the way, you know, you want to know who killed your friend, basically, right? So I think it just shifts. It starts off by that, and then...
Yeah, but then it shifts. So then in the end, he's, like, when he gets to the nitty-gritty, or at least when he gets to the confession, he talks about... It sounds like because in a way, that's the only thing he'd really thought through, right? The second murder was just a bad... you know, like a coincidence in a way.
A big whoops.
And then yeah, exactly. And then but the other thing is the one that he the murder of the pawnbroker is the one he had planned, or has he planned it? We don't really know. But
no, he did plan it, but not well.
to some extent. So I found that very peculiar. Why he starts off by admitting that he had murdered the sister, but then the confession is actually not about the murder of the sister.
But that makes sense though, right? I mean, basically he says, like, he wants to, he says that he killed the sister, and then said, but I didn't mean to, I was doing this other thing, and then, you know, I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? He says, like, I didn't mean to do it. Well, he didn't really say she happened to be there when I was killing the other person. He doesn't explicitly link it quite that much, but I mean, that makes sense to me, right?
Yeah, I think I was just hoping for some sense of, or some apology, or some sense of.
Antonia, you don't know what's going to come well. No, but this actually relates to something that that I wrote down, which is, wait, give me a second. I wrote down the page number. Jeez, it's a long confession. Yeah, so he never actually says that he killed in the beginning, right? He's just like, do you want to make a guess who killed your friend? She's like, dude, what are you doing? And then he basically says, like, well, take a good look, right? And then she realizes that, she realizes then, like, oh God, that's what the guy did. She looks at him again to be sure about what's happening. And so she just realized that he murdered her friend, right? And then the first thing he says after that is, enough, Sonja, enough, don't torment me. It's always about him.
It is.
This is page 494. It's all like, even like he just confessed to killing someone's friend, and then he immediately makes it about how he's suffering.
Yeah, I realized that as well.
Yeah, he doesn't feel any remorse. Yeah,
and I think also he's not open at all, right? So he wants to decide how much he gives away and how much, to what extent things are discussed and talked about. And then as soon as she wants to kind of like...
What do you mean by that?
So where's the part did you refer to?
I read page 494.
So yeah, what I meant by this is, like, he says, enough, Sonja, enough, don't torment me. So he kind of like cuts her off. Well,
I don't think he actually says anything, right? Doesn't she just look at him? And she just looks at him and goes like, oh, fuck, he actually did it. And then, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she just says, Lord.
Yeah. But I guess what I mean is that he wants to be in control of where the conversation or this like interaction is going, I guess. And he, on one hand, wants to be honest with her and tell her what he's done, but on the other hand, he also doesn't want her to punish him or torment him. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think like the most of that conversation and most of him, I mean, he already tried to tell her in the last part, right? And I think both of those conversations revolve mainly around him trying to tell her and not being able to. I think he obviously wants to tell her, or maybe just anyone, but he definitely wants to tell her in this instance. And it's difficult to confess to a murder, to a double homicide. So I think he basically just never quite has the guts to do it. So that's kind of how I read most of the scene, is him just basically, he wants to do something that's really difficult to do and just can't really. So he does it in the most awkward way or roundabout way possible.
Yeah. How do you feel about how the scene ends? Because she basically wants him to, she's obviously very religious and she wants him to confess and receive the punishment he deserves, and therefore, deal with his sin.
So there's two things. The first thing is, two things I was thinking of when I heard this. The first was when I read this. The first is that Sonia is, the most religious character in the book. And probably she's the only one who's like obviously openly religious frequently. I think so, right? And Raskolnikov is confessing to her, right? She's basically taking the role of a priest who he's not confessing to her in anonymity, right? In that sense that a priest would not allow to tell anyone. But I think that's basically, that's what he wants to do, right? He wants to talk about it. He wants to get it off his mind, and he wants to tell someone about what he did. And I think that's kind of the role she's taking there, almost as someone who he feels he can confide in. And he kind of is confessing his sins, right? That's kind of what he's doing. But he's doing it in a way that I think he hopes he's going to get away with it and not... the whole assumption is that she's not going to tell the police, right? I think. Or not, I don't know, because Raskolnikov did a lot of stuff that suggests he kind of wants to get caught. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, this isn't really like a full point, but like one thing I noticed that, so we talked about with, I think I mentioned it in this episode already twice, that Sonia is probably one of the most likable characters in the book, or Razumikin. These seems to be the only two people who are kind of nice to people and not insane and annoying. And she's also the most religious character. And it seems to me, so I once saw this meme. It was something like Dostoevsky drawing in like young, like atheistic people or something with a lot of this like nihilistic talk, and then bashing them over the head with Catholic doctrine or whatever. And it seems to me like it's maybe not a coincidence that the most likable character almost in the book is the most religious. And I wonder whether this is almost the way Dostoevsky thinks people should behave. Not sure. Yeah.
We don't really know, because she's the most likable, the most selfless, and the most religious. However, I don't think this should be a suggestion that if everybody just blindly follows religion, everything would be great.
Yeah, the thing is, this is not a proper point I'm making. I guess what I'm saying, I just saw this meme once and I haven't read enough of Dostoevsky. And this kind of made me think of it, that maybe also this is going to come back a bit.
I think she's definitely not the smartest person. She's not critical in a sense. I think she's...
isn't she basically just a helpless Razumikin? They both kind of help quite a bit, but Razumikin actually like actively does stuff. Whereas she seems to just be... she's basically a kid, right, who's been forced into prostitution. She's very kind, but not very capable, maybe. That's the way of putting it. You just feel sorry for her, basically, right?
Yeah, and I think like in the end of this chapter, when she wants him to wear her cross that she's giving to him, which I think is just a symbol of him
bearing his cross.
Yeah, and committing his sins, and bearing the cross and dealing with the aftermath in a way that's ethical or moral. But then he says, "Give it to me but he only says give it to me because he doesn't want to upset her, and then he says I will put it on later. So we don't really believe him. So he pretends, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do all the right things, but not right now. I'm gonna do it later. And she believes him. She says yes, better. She echoed enthusiastically. So I think this is just shows quite nicely actually that she's not critical and smart at all, because all the other characters would have been, like, no, you wear it now. I know you're not going to wear it later.
Yeah, it's probably that those like two sentences are almost the best description of Raskolnikov and of Sonia. Her just being like naively believing in people doing the right thing, and him just not taking responsibility for his actions. Or maybe he will, who knows. But I doubt it.
Well, maybe he will be forced to do so, because as we know now, there's not only Sonia but also a second person who's heard the confession. I have to admit that part really annoys me, because it's just like in terms of just storytelling. Maybe it's all happened differently in part 6, but now what's kind of annoying is that Svidrigailov is kind of, he's a bit of a shit stirrer in that he like offers money to Raskolnikov's sister to not marry Lucien. But the other function he seems to have is just to, by coincidence, living next to it and overhearing this thing, and then being able to, I don't know, blackmail Raskolnikov or something. What I would find much more interesting is, and I'm kind of surprised that this hasn't happened yet at all, but that there seems to be no moral dilemma in Sonia whether she should tell the police about this. That for me would be interesting if someone else was again forced to go through something bad because of Raskolnikov's actions. So last time I already mentioned that I kind of was assuming the entire time someone was going to falsely be accused of committing the crime and would have to suffer because of Raskolnikov's actions. Or rather, sorry, that's slightly differently. He killed people, they already suffered through his actions. But someone basically having to bear the burden of his sins, if you want to put it religiously, as that young guy, Mikolai, whatever his name was. God, I'm getting so good at remembering names. Happened at the end of the last part. And I thought, like, okay, now, like with Sonia knowing about this, it would be interesting to see whether she is going to have some sort of moral conflict, whether she should help someone whom she clearly likes and who seems to like her, even though he basically is mean to her always. And her having to make the decision whether she should tell the police or not. But now it seems to go more towards someone happened to hear it and then he's going to tell the police or something like that. Although I don't think that would have been so fitting, because I think there are two systems of law in a sense. One of them is the government, so
legal
justice system, and the other one is the Bible. And I think she's less concerned about abiding to the law and the justice system than she is to abiding to God's law. So in that sense, she wants to convince him to, bear the cross, commit to sins, etc. But
not commit sins.
Not commit, admit.
Antonia. don't encourage him.
No. Admit that he murdered the women, etc. And that would be the moral thing to do. And for her, it's important to convince him of the right actions. But I don't think she's so concerned about him actually, going to the police. The police just happens
never even
to
thought
be.
About it, right?
Pardon?
She never thought about it. There's no discussion in the entire part of her going like, oh yeah, maybe I should tell. Like, she doesn't even think.
Yeah, we don't know. But I think the way I read her character, I wasn't surprised that there was no moral dilemma, because it doesn't seem to be that's her biggest concern. I think for me, it seems like her biggest concern is whether he's going to end up in heaven or not. Because
which seems unlikely, let's be honest.
Yeah, but I think her bigger concern is his,
Yeah, no, okay, that is a fair point. I think, so yeah, you're right in terms of the character. Yeah, she cares more about God than a judge. But I think I also meant it more in terms of just storytelling from Dostoevsky's perspective. There were a few things in this part, and there's another one I'll get to later, that kind of annoyed me, where I thought like, dude, can't you just write this like a little bit better? Like, it wouldn't be like, you just have to take out a few bad parts. And so there's this whole thing in storytelling. Oh God, what's this called now? The Deus ex machina is a concept where basically, that I think is just usually very poor storytelling. Basically, you have a story that goes towards a really bad end, and then God just comes in and solves it, right? Or like someone who has nothing to do with the story comes in, like the White Knight comes, kills all the bad people, and then everything's good. It's like you have this story and this drama within the story, and then just something from outside comes and just completely changes everything, right? And that's just a stylistic device that you can use, and I think it's almost always a bad idea. It's always just kind of lame. Maybe the only exception being Monty Python, when they ran out of money to shoot the rest of the film, so they just just made one scene where the police comes into the Middle Ages and shoots everyone or something. I can't remember exactly. Anyway, it's I think it's usually, when it happens, it's always really disappointing, because you kind of want to see how the story ends, but then it ends with, basically God just solving the problem. And here it's kind of the opposite, almost, in a way, to me, that it's not that God, the White Knight comes in and saves everything, but you have this like dramatic story, and then this random guy turns up who just has nothing to do with the story and just happens to live in the room next door and now has this information. I don't know, it just seems like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see your point, but I think it's going to get a bit more complex, because we still don't know what his motives were to come to St. Petersburg in the first place.
Yeah, that is this... Yeah, I was about to say that there's the thing that makes it a bit better is the fact that he is involved in their hometown story of... Nope, don't remember what his wife was called, who was died. Like, there is a bit more to it. It's not a complete God solves the problem, but it is... It just seems right now, it seems a bit unnecessary, to be honest. Yeah. I think if this is a psychological drama, I'm not sure you need that person, because, I don't know. I mean, I've said it before, I think in the last parts, that to me, Raskolnikov never seemed concerned about anything that he did. He seemed more concerned about whether he get caught. And that as soon as basically it turned out there wasn't any real evidence, he calmed down a lot. And he's also been much more coherent in this part again, especially when he accused Lucien of, why he would do this to Sonia and put the money in, I think. He spoke very eloquently again. And all of this, him speaking like a proper person, all of this happened after he found out there's no real evidence against him. So in a way, you might say that without someone like Svidrigailov who can apply a bit of pressure, Raskolnikov's just not going to do anything. He's just going to go free. So I don't know.
But we don't even know whether he's going to apply any pressure, because in the very last thing he says is, "And you'll see what an accommodating fellow I am. You'll see that I'm not so very hard to get along with. ...
Yeah, but that's basically him saying he's... I mean, come on, Antonia, I think you're being a bit too nice here. If a guy comes in and says, "Oh yeah, I heard about your murder, I'm sure we'll get along fine," that's basically him saying, "I've got you. You have to do whatever I tell you to do."
Yeah, but we don't know exactly what he was going to do, and whether, because it seems to me he has some bigger motive.
He denied it, but do you think maybe he wants to marry Raskolnikov's sister?
Yeah, that's a possibility, but there's something... I don't think, the murder is his biggest concern, but he was just lucky, because in reality there's something else that he wants to achieve or do, and now he's got a bit of leverage.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't he kind of borderline accused of killing his wife? I can't remember exactly. So I also don't think let's put it this way. If I overhear, not me specifically, but if one overhears a murder and then, the confession of a murder, and then doesn't go to the police, but starts talking to the person who confessed about it, you can be pretty sure that that person is kind of fine with illegal stuff. He's he's going to use this to his own advantage, and I guess we'll see what that exactly is going to be. But yeah.
Did you have any other points you want to discuss?
Let me see. I have an entire page worth of comments. So this is something that really surprised me. Actually, sorry, I need to very briefly do a proper online study of research right now. Give me a second. Wait, when was Crime and Punishment published? 1866. Yeah. 66. So this is what really surprises me. In part 1, they talk about Darwin. So this book was published in 1866, and my very quick internet research just revealed that Darwin's Origin of Species was published in 1859. So I was just really surprised that a book by an English guy about biology was so famous 7 years later that a Russian novelist assumed that regular people in St. Petersburg would be talking about this. I don't know. This is just something I went like, I didn't expect this to
but wasn't
that fast.
Yeah, very influential in the sense that he very much changed how people thought about evolution.
Yeah, of course. I don't know, it was controversial when it came out. And it kind of almost makes sense that it's controversial because of the whole religious thing, right? And this all comes in this part of discussion where Lusin and Lebziatnikov, whatever his name is, talk about all these things, about politics and whatever. So it kind of makes sense that maybe they would know about it more than others. It's just, I don't know, it makes sense that now something would spread very fast, but I just didn't assume that in the 1860s or 70s.
Yeah, but he was an educated... Dostoevsky was educated, and it seems like he was very much interested in new schools of thought, etc.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not even that surprised that Dostoevsky found out about it. I'm just surprised that he would put it in a book that regular people would read, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Darwin." I know that it was already common knowledge, almost. As if you now read about something that happened 7 years ago, which is 2014. Obviously, stuff would go into common knowledge, but yeah, I know that was just one thing that really surprised me there. So I just have random points now. This is something I actually meant to say in one of the earlier parts already. I don't know, Antonia, whether you had this realization too, but so we're recording this during one of various COVID lockdowns, and it's just funny to me how comfortable people are sitting next to someone who's basically dying from a lung infection or whatever. The entire book is just people are dying from terrible things. It happens a few times, and everyone just sits next to them and goes as if they know about infections and stuff, right? It's just.
I think two things. We are now hyper aware of these things, and
exactly.
Somebody describing a cough in a book, it's like alarm bells
she was coughing
ringing.
Blood.
Yeah, it's it's what we're now super sensitive to as a topic, but then also I feel that back then people didn't know as much about transmission as we do now, for sure, and.
No, I mean, even now, I mean, this is more comment about how not even about the book, but more how the pandemic changes you reading a classic book. Because, if someone was coughing or sneezing a few times in your office, you wouldn't think much of it a year ago, right?
But now it's
God damn it, it's been a year in the pandemic, more than a year ago. But 2 years ago. But now it's just, if someone's coughing blood in my office, I'd say, hey, do you want to maybe go see a doctor?
Isolate.
Yeah. But the other thing is, and this is something I think it's when the Marmeladov guy dies. This is my favorite part, I think, in the entire book, and I just never got around to mentioning it. But now that we're talking about medicine, I can mention it, which is, so he was hit by this, or trampled over by horses in a cart, right? And he has all these wounds all over his body, and he's bleeding. And Raskolnikov made all this effort to say yeah, I'll pay for the doctor. Let the doctor come in. And then the doctor comes in and says, oh no, this isn't looking good. I could let some blood, but I don't think it's going to work. It's someone is already bleeding really strongly. Don't let blood, maybe.
Yeah.
And I loved how he just always said it like, it's an option we have, but I don't think it's going to help. He's already beyond. It's like, don't. He's already lost like a pint of blood. Don't take more out of him. Yeah. Oh, I love reading old things and realizing how stupid people are, and then realizing that the same applies to us. And people look back to what we're doing.
Yeah, that is very much.
Most of the stuff we do is dumb, even to contemporaries. But yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good point to finish. We're all dumb. In some sense.
That's a very good point. Yes, let's always remember that, because unlike Raskolnikov and Katerina Ivanovna, we don't think we're inherently superior to anyone else.
It's a good note to finish on.
Yeah, but I think, Antonia, we do have to continue our tradition of spending 1 or 2 minutes thinking about what's going to happen next.
It's now obviously the finale.
Yeah, so there's an epilogue right after that, but we're now reaching the last part. So maybe let's start with the question we've had every single time now. Is he going to get arrested?
I think it will come out either by somebody telling the police or him just getting to a point where he hands himself to the police.
Okay, so you think he's, coming out, not in terms of like, he already confessed it to 2 people, right? In a way it is already out, but in terms of like, you mean the police is going to know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is called Crime and Punishment. So it's been surprisingly little punishment so far. But you think, but just the police is gonna know, not they're going to arrest, incarcerate. I don't know what they do back then to murderers. Probably kill him. I imagine the death penalty is still a thing in 1870s Russia.
Maybe that happens in the epilogue.
Nice.
No, but I think that what he thinks is going to happen is that he's going to go to Siberia to the labor camps. No. He mentioned this in his confession.
Is it about that? I always wondered. They said, "I'll go to Siberia," but wasn't that just a metaphor? Like, I'll go with you wherever.
I thought it was going to Siberia to labor camps.
Oh, really? Okay.
But I might be wrong. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah. So then, there's a few more plot lines that we can talk about for 10 seconds each. Maybe not that many actually, but. So, Svidrigailov, what do you think he's going to do?
I don't understand his motive. The only one I could think of would be something like he wants to marry Raskolnikov's sister or something along the lines. But other than that, I don't really see what his goal is.
Yeah, I think so. That would be my very risky guess now, is that he's going to blackmail Raskolnikov to... I'm not sure what Raskolnikov's supposed to do, but put a good word for him, I guess, or something. Lucien, is he going to come back? Or is that the last we've seen of him?
He's probably going to come back on the side. Something, but I don't think he is major. I think this is kind of like his prime scene.
Yeah, is there any other character? Let's see. Well, the police detective, he's Pevri Petrovich. I've been missing him. And his intentional obnoxiousness. So let's see. I'm just going through characters now, whether there's anyone who half of them have died so far. Katerina Ivanova, Elizaveta, Alyona Ivanova, they're all dead. Nastasia has disappeared too, the maid who works for Raskolnikov.
Yeah, but I don't think that she's going to reappear in any...
Yeah. She was actually a kind of likable character. Marmeladov's dead too. Jesus, so many people have died. Razumikin, do you think he's going to fulfill his dream of marrying Raskolnikov's sister?
Yeah, potentially. I think that could happen. But maybe we're not going to maybe see a marriage, but maybe it's like, it's a bit of like...
Going to make a move?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, then cool. Next week's going to be the last
part finale.
And then I guess we're going to have after that still the epilogue or maybe general discussion about everything. But
sounds good.
This is the 6th episode now of our discussion of Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, discussing part 6. So as usual, here's a brief summary of what happened in each chapter. Chapter 1. Raskolnikov is in his flat and decides to talk to Svidrigailov to settle the situation. Razumikin is asking himself what on earth is going on with Raskolnikov. As Raskolnikov is about to leave to see Svidrigailov, Porfiry Petrovich enters Raskolnikov's room. Chapter 2. Porfiry Petrovich reveals he knows everything about the murder. He accuses Raskolnikov of being the murderer and asks him to confess. Raskolnikov doesn't, and Porfiry Petrovich leaves. Chapter 3. Raskolnikov goes to see Svidrigailov. The conversation is all over the place, but Svidrigailov gets Raskolnikov. I have no idea what that's supposed to say. Oh, no. Okay, so this is actually a slightly tricky problem. So in this book, or in this part, they call Raskolnikov Rodion Romanich. And I don't know whether that's a normal thing or not. Do you know? Because I noticed that Svidrigailov kept calling him Rodion Romanich, and then Svidrigailov also called him Rodion Romanich. And I can't remember seeing that before. Do you remember whether that happened before?
I think so, no?
Because otherwise it's Romanovich, right? But they kind of shortened it, and I don't know whether that was intentional or not.
To be honest, I stopped paying close attention to the names. I just tried to identify characters.
Yeah. Anyway, so after the conversation between Raskolnikov and Svidrigailov, the conversation ends with Svidrigailov starting to talk about Raskolnikov's sister. I think so. That's a weird note I made. Anyway, chapter 4. Svidrigailov tells Raskolnikov all about his life with Marfa Petrovna and his seducing of usually helpless women. He also talks about his new fiancée, a 16-year-old child. Svidrigailov tries to leave Raskolnikov. Chapter 5. Svidrigailov meets with Raskolnikov's sister at his place and reveals to her his knowledge of Raskolnikov's crimes. He blackmails Raskolnikov's sister to marry Svidrigailov, and in return he'll save Raskolnikov or not say anything. She refuses. He won't let her out of the room. She tries to shoot him twice, but fails to really hit him properly. He lets her go, but picks up her gun that she left with one bullet remaining, puts it in his pocket, and leaves. Chapter 6. Svidrigailov walks around town. Oh yeah, this is, I think, my favorite summary. It always sounds so great when you put it like in 2 sentences. Svidrigailov walks around town and visits a few pubs, gets soaking wet from the rain, visits his fiancée late at night, gives her 15,000 rubles, goes to a hotel, falls asleep, has 2 nightmares, wakes up early, walks around town and shoots himself. Chapter 7. Raskolnikov visits his mother and makes her understand that something is really wrong with him and he'll be gone for a long time. Back at his place, he tells his sister he'll hand himself in. Chapter 8. Raskolnikov goes to say goodbye to Zonya, goes to Ilya Petrovich Powderkeg to confess, hears about Svidrigailov's suicide and leaves again without confessing. Outside, he sees Zonya, returns to Ilya Petrovich, and finally confesses to murdering the 2 women. See, a lot happened in that part. A lot of notes.
Did indeed.
I'm glad I wrote this down, otherwise this would have been a 20-minute retelling.
Yeah.
It was already like 5 minutes. Anyway, so I think we answered our question, right? Whether he's going to get arrested by the police.
Yeah.
You correctly predicted it would happen. Well, I guess technically he hasn't been arrested in the book, but
yeah, he's confessed
to a policeman, so or a lieutenant. I don't know whether that's the same thing.
What do you think about the whole suicide scene or chapter? Svidrigailov.
That was a bit of a weird one. Slightly unexpected.
It was also particularly weird because all of a sudden there was a very long part from somebody else's perspective that didn't have Raskolnikov in it at all, and I was a bit confused why he Svidrigailov all of a sudden was center of attention for such a long time. Also,
So that's we had that. That's something I find a bit weird about Dostoevsky, that we had it before with Lucien, right? Where we had this one chapter between Lucien and the other guy talking for like 15 pages about fucking whatever. And,
but it seemed more relevant in hindsight, and this just seems like, for me, this chapter raised more questions than answer, because I'm still not 100% sure I understand why he killed himself, other than maybe realizing that he's a bad human being. And
yeah, it's really weird because, in this long summary, I also still left out lots of stuff. Like, for example, that Svidrigailov seems to be a kind of confusing character in general, because he appears very dramatically, but both of us forgot who he was, and had to look it up again. Then, he's basically only in third person until like page, 200 or something? 300? I can't remember which part he appears in. But he's basically not in it at all. And then throughout parts like 4, 5, and 6, it just slowly drifts to being more and more about that guy. And like one thing also, there was always the question, like, does he actually have a fiance, right? Because he told Raskolnikov he has his fiance, he's going to marry, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know whether we talked about this, but I always kind of assumed he doesn't have a fiance. Turns out he does, and she's 16, and that's nice. But so it was kind of also really random to see, like, oh yeah, she actually exists. Suddenly, like, just before his suicide, like, oh, okay, he actually wasn't lying.
Yeah, but also what I found confusing, because all of a sudden this topic of abuse came up in a way, because this is in the end what he did, right? He kind of like seduced girls or rather young ones, and especially his fiance, and he seemed to have a bit of a
seduced isn't really the word, right?
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what the details were, but wasn't it basically I can't remember what happened. She was just like shit scared the entire time, right? Wasn't she like sitting on his knee just crying the entire time or something like that?
I think she was grateful in some sense that he seemed to promise her money and security, etc. But I don't think that she actually wanted to be with him. But I don't know. It's what I find most confusing is just I think, as you said earlier, that this just became so much a part of part 6. Why do we have to learn all the stuff about his life with Marfa Petrovna, and that they had this arrangement that he could have mistresses, which basically meant the maids who worked for him, and that, or at least in a few cases, it was that. Yeah, why do we need to know all of this? I don't know. So, in a way, like, he has the main function he has kind of dramatically in the book, right, is that he overhears the confession. So now it's not just two lovers who share knowledge about a dark secret, but it's a third person who has interests other than the two people, right? So that for me was always what I expected to be the main thing. And in a way, it was still a big part of it, with Raskolnikov going up, hearing about Svidrigailov's suicide, then actually thinking, oh, maybe I'll just leave then. But yeah, it was weird to me that was then suddenly like almost 2 entire chapters were just about Svidrigailov. Yeah, especially so late in the book. Yeah, I don't, because there's a lot of information I feel that, as you've said, is not very important for the reader to know. And then he kills himself, and then it ends in a way. So it was a bit confusing to me to get all this information to the very end.
I don't want to be too cynical, but isn't it that, like, with writers around that time, they were paid by like word count or something? I thought that was like around the time. I hope Dickens was around the same time. I don't know when Dickens lived, but I heard that like with Dickens was the same thing. They were paid like per word or page or something, so that like their books are sometimes longer than strictly necessary. I don't know whether that's the case here. I don't know, but I mean, let's be honest. We have 6 parts, and they are all within 10 pages of each other or something. Could be a coincidence or intentional. I don't know. But yeah, it was a bit. I don't know. I've also heard dramatically, sometimes writers will just, you have this point that you're working towards, this like auto-dramatic moment. In this case, I guess either Raskolnikov confesses or he has to do something strong has to happen for him to settle the question, basically. And basically what Dostoevsky's doing, he's just delaying us getting there, right? Which I think is a pretty common thing, to just like build tension by just making people go like, yeah, but like, how does this relate to the main thing? Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe it's just a bit of mystery, like adding this sense of like, because, in a way, lots of other things could have happened, right? Especially when he was, the chapter about his suicide, he was walking around, he seemed almost in a similar state to Raskolnikov in the beginning. He wasn't exactly thinking super straight the entire time, or in a mentally stable state. He had a weapon with one shot in it, and it's a question. I first thought he might shoot Raskolnikov. I didn't know. Or is he gonna shoot he wasn't gonna shoot the sister because he could have, killed her before she took out the gun or after, whatever. But yeah, he could have, who knows what he could have done, right?
Yeah, although I think I expected him to commit suicide. I think this one. Do you know why I thought so? Because he had first made like a suggestion to Sonia, pretty much alluding to the Raskolnikov has two options: either he kills himself or he confesses. Mm-hmm. So the theme of suicide was brought up by him. Therefore.
But Raskolnikov had already thought that himself also, right? That part seemed to me kind of obvious in the sense that Raskolnikov had gone over the bridge and seen the woman trying to kill herself. And I don't know, it seemed to me like maybe at the time that was the thinking. It's like, well, those are your two options. Yeah. Suicide or confession. Yeah. Similar today. Yeah, I don't know. No, so I never assumed it. I thought more he was going to do violence to someone else. Yeah. Very briefly talking about his suicide, he held his gun against his temple, which is not always, I'm assuming, the best way to kill yourself, because blowing out your prefrontal cortex is not necessarily mortal. You have to go with the motor areas or your brainstem.
Yeah.
I'm assuming. I haven't looked at the statistics.
Yeah. Well.
Also, like, depending on how you get it, like, I think your forehead, isn't that also like one of the strongest like bones in the human body? So like if you get it, like if you're too far at the front, not a good way to kill yourself.
Next point. Let's just assume that.
It worked.
We can assume that it worked.
Good on him.
Yeah, but yeah, it's also like, do you know what? It's almost like, because we got told a lot of information about him, such as that he's a weird character. He's not easy. He has like many layers to him, right? On one level, he's, in my eyes, a child abuser. On the other level, and probably a murderer.
Quite a nice guy.
Yeah, but then also, like, I don't really know his reasoning for giving away money to people who can really need it, which seems like a nice gesture. And like, there's something inside of him that makes him think, although it's not purely altruistic, but I don't know. He's not only, he seems to be a bit more complex. And then when he has the nightmares that suggest that something is is troubling him
by what he did to young children, or I can't even remember exactly.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure, because this was again like when in the dream with the little girl. At first, I thought that he was going to abuse her because she was like she was super helpless, nobody was around, and then he undressed her, and then I thought, oh no, where's this going? Yeah. But then
I forgot about that part, yeah.
But then he generally, in the dream, that is, wanted to help her. But then it turned out to be a dream. So there was this bit of like ambivalence of this like young, helpless girl, which I don't know. What did he really want, or what did he want from people? I don't know. I just feel like there is some complexity to his character, but it's too late into the book to really discuss this in detail.
Yeah, I mean, what I find weird is also that he, why was he even in St. Petersburg in the first place? It's just kind of really...
Well, for the women, no? Isn't that what he, like...
That's what he says, but like, I don't know, it seems like most of the things he said seems to actually be true. But I don't know, like I initially thought it was kind of cool to introduce him because he seemed to me to add like an air of potential violence that was kind of almost more malicious or something than other people who seemed just driven by desperation or despair. Whereas he seemed like, suddenly there's this guy who has money who may or may not have killed his wife. But yeah, it just seems all a bit... It seems a bit random. It seems like he's kind of involved in all the like main plot lines. His sister's life, over him being kind of the only real outside witness to Raskolnikov's initial confession, but like saying that he killed someone. He fits thematically. Maybe there are some parallels to Raskolnikov himself, but it kind of doesn't quite work for me. I don't know. It's like he has some cool scenes here and there. He kind of fits in the plot lines, but somehow it doesn't really make sense to me. But to be fair, I also never really paid too much attention to him, even after the big entrance he made. That part was always, I think I mentioned this in an earlier part, the whole part of like the sister and Lucien never seemed that interesting to me. So in the beginning, I didn't pay much attention to it. So maybe I'd understand him more if I paid more attention to him. But right now it seems a bit random.
What do you think about... So in the very end, Raskolnikov goes in to hand himself in, but then he finds out about Svidrigailov's suicide, and then he decides to walk out again. I wonder what that was. Was that... I didn't quite understand whether this was like he saw some opportunity to maybe blame Svidrigailov for the murder.
No.
Was it just... Pardon?
The evidence against him was gone. Right? The assumption here is always that Sonia is so nice she'll never say anything to police anyway, right? She's just put off as like so simple and she'll just do whatever she's not a danger. And the only evidence, Porfiry Petrovich came to Raskolnikov and said, I know it was you. I just don't have any evidence, but you'll hand yourself in, we'll get you eventually. But they have no evidence, right? So the only outside evidence, the only person who could have said anything against, so I don't know exactly what the status of evidence and eyewitness testimony was in the Russian courts of the 1860s. But I could imagine that back then, if someone says, I heard him say that he did it, then that counts quite a lot. So the way I always understood it is that, so first Raskolnikov thought, there was this merchant or whatever who on the road said, you're the murderer. And then Raskolnikov thought like, oh shit, I'm going to get caught. This is not good. And then this other guy, Mikolai, confessed or whatever. It was this confusing scene. And then it turns out, Raskolnikov realized there's actually no hard evidence against him. And then he was completely calm, I think, after that, right? I think then he started speaking pretty normally and not being just all over the place and basically giving himself away all the time. But then he realized that there now is evidence because someone overheard him tell about the murder. And now I think, again, he has these two conflicting things, right? The one is the kind of conscience or his guilt for having committed the horrible act, which I think is pretty minimal in him. And the other is the kind of, what's the probability I'm going to get caught? And I think as soon as Svidrigailov died, he realized, I'm not going to get caught unless I hand myself in. So he left, because why would he?
Yeah.
There's no reason to, unless you think that, as Sonia does, and as I guess she convinces him by just standing there, there's some sort of value to confessing your sins and standing up for what you did. Unless you really believe in that, there's no reason to hand yourself in, right? That and Mikolai might have gone to prison or not, I don't know.
Mm.
But I think as we've established, and as I'll talk a bit more about later, Raskolnikov doesn't give a shit about anyone other than himself, including Mikolai, who would go to prison or whatever for his acts. So, no, that part made complete sense to me. Like, why would he?
Yeah. But then there's like this change of mind at the very, very end, because when he before he goes to hand himself in, he talks to his sister, and the sister says something along the lines of, well, by handing yourself in, you've already made up for part of your crime or whatever. And then he's like, he disagrees with her. He says, "Oh, I didn't commit a crime. I just killed some like old woman." I think the only thing he's struggling with more is that he seems to be a sort of ordinary person rather than something extraordinary. But he still doesn't think or doesn't feel very guilty. But then he turns himself in. Then he finds out about the suicide, walks out, sees Sonia, and then everything changes. He turns around and confesses.
Well, I think that is her role, right? To either stand in for or remind him of his inner moral compass, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So I think when he sees her, I mean, also there was also like this one part where, he wanted to leave without her, right? Or he left without her, and then he was like wandering around town, and then he saw that she was like following him basically. And this was this part where there was something like he realized she was always going to be there with him or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in one way you can see this as this kind of romantic, oh, she's going to be there for him, whatever. But if you see her more as a symbol of his moral compass, then his moral his guilt or whatever is always going to be with him. And I think when he sees her standing outside the police station or whatever, I think he's just reminded of this, like, it's not going away.
And that's actually an interesting way to think about it. And I think you're probably right. It is indeed not very romantic, but probably, as you say, more.
It's both. I think it's supposed to be both.
Yeah, but it's not going to leave him this reminder of what he's done.
That's a good thought. I just had live on air, right?
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. Yeah. No, this is something I want to talk to you about more, like in the last part when we just discussed the whole thing. But I've realized I've thought so much more about this book than any other book just because we've been talking about it.
Yeah.
And I definitely wouldn't have had that thought if we weren't doing this. But yeah. By the way, I want to talk briefly. I have to admit, so I understand it from Raskolnikov's perspective, but I'm kind of disappointed that he didn't confess to Porfiry Petrovich, because Porfiry Petrovich is so annoying in the best way possible. And I wrote down one point. So I really like how so when he visits Raskolnikov, right, he starts off again with his whole like talking about and doing whatever and just beating about the bush and not really getting to the point. But then all of a sudden, just like that, he's like, by the way, I know you killed the person.
Yeah.
Like he really goes from like, he almost plays like good cop, bad cop alone by himself, basically. I really like that as a tactic. That must be super effective. If this person, if you feel like, oh, this guy's so annoying, he's like he knows something, but he's not saying it, whatever, and then suddenly he just goes right at it. But what are
he's very much he's very much in control of his own emotions, in contrast to Raskolnikov.
Everyone else.
Not at all. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I found also interesting is that at least there wasn't a lot of text here, so maybe it's more coincidence, but it seemed to me that the difficult part for Raskolnikov when dealing with Porfiry Petrovich was the uncertainty of what he knew. Because as soon as Porfiry Petrovich said, like, yeah, I know you did it, I'm still finding evidence, but I'll get you, or rather you'll hand yourself in anyway. As soon as he says that, Raskolnikov, I think, becomes much calmer and clearer in his thoughts and in his speech. I felt like I think before it was this constant thing like, oh, what does he know? You know, what's going to happen? But then suddenly when he accused him, he was like, no, didn't do it, or I can't remember exactly what he said, but I just found that interesting.
Well, he says very little, actually, and he listens more. And then in the end, he says something like, well, just so you know, I didn't confess anything.
Yeah, but he plays it pretty cool then, right? As soon as like everything's on the table, he's able to deal with it again. Just found that, I think often in life it is harder to deal with uncertainty than to have the facts, and that reminded me of that. So one thing I was thinking about is that, as I mentioned earlier, to me, the whole sister plot seemed way out of proportion, basically. To me, it never seemed like that was really supposed to be a big part of the story. And it really reminded me of something that Alfred Hitchcock talked about. So, film director Alfred Hitchcock, who made, now I'm forgetting all the films.
The Birds.
Psycho, The Birds, Marnie, whatever. Lots and lots of good films. Anyway, he talked about this concept of the MacGuffin. And the MacGuffin is basically something that it doesn't really matter what it is. It's just something that advances the plot. So, for example, in Psycho, I can't remember what her name is, but the main character steals some money in the beginning and then flees. It doesn't really matter like what the money's, it's just something that gets her to flee. And then stuff happens. And then after that, it's irrelevant. And to me, the plot with Raskolnikov's sister getting married to Lucien seemed like a MacGuffin. It's just something to, he's kind of stressed out, and it's just something that pushes him like over the edge. So he then commits the crime. And I'm really confused that, we're not finished with the book, but we're pretty much finished with the book. And it's become it's become such a large part with Svidrigailov, the sister, the mother, Lucien, all these people. I feel like, I don't know, was it really that relevant? Is it a genuine, interesting plot line, or is it a MacGuffin that is just taken out of proportion?
Well, this is why it's a 6-part book over 500 pages, 600 pages, because there are lots of different plots, right? And there is this one main plot, but then there are like side plots in a way.
Yeah, but like the thing that I'm almost a bit disappointed now is that there wasn't more stuff about either Raskolnikov's guilt or his sense of, am I going to get caught? Or like something about like, I don't know, it just seems to me like the sister plot is kind of not that interesting almost. I don't know, in a way, of course it relates a lot to many other things talked about, such that, the men provide the finances basically for the women, at least in that society at the time, and how that, affects how Svidrigailov talks to women or interacts with them. To some extent, also basically Raskolnikov does the same with Sonia, right? He sees someone who's poor and gives her all he has, basically. So like it fits in, of course, thematically with a lot of the other plot lines. It just, I don't know, never struck me as that interesting.
Yeah, but don't you think that it's like almost like a comparison of how different people try to escape the situation? And there's this...
That's a good point, yeah.
Raskolnikov is maybe like the male stereotype or a negative version of stereotype of applying force and violence, trying to help himself and get him out of a certain situation, whereas his sister, although she's calculating to some extent, she doesn't really ever like Lucien, but she would marry him for her own good to get out of her situation. But then sees it, obviously, that that's not the way forward. So she has some sort of character change or development in the way that she seems to realize something. And also, in the end, she really doesn't want to be with
Svidrigailov.
Because I think also...
Why not?
No, but she
like
wouldn't...
such a great guy.
Yeah, but even knowing that he might have some money, etc. So she seemed to have learned something. Yeah.
Yeah. I just realized that there's all this question of like people getting married. Like everyone seems to be getting married to at least 2 people in this book at some point. It just occurred to me that the 2 by far best men in the entire book are probably Razumikin and Porfiry Petrovich.
Yeah.
because they're just not psychopaths. Basically, that's like they're not drunkards. They're not violent. Yeah, they've got it going.
Yeah, that's true. What do you think about the mother? Did she, in the end, kind of know what had happened but didn't want to see it, or
did she know that people were murdered? I can't remember whether she knew about the crime itself. I mean, she definitely knows that something's really messed up, right? She knows that, but I don't know whether she actually probably, right? But
I think she did. I mean, can't pinpoint the moment where she would have found out, but it seems like this was common knowledge.
It seems like when like Razumikin would have been there and visited his sister and his mother, then he would have, or like Lucin was there, or whatever. Yeah, it seems like in one of those group scenes, it would have been mentioned or something like that. I mean, I think in part I think in part she knows Raskolnikov's not going to tell her anyway, for whatever reason, and in part I think it's because he just seems quite estranged. I think, she expected, I mean, I think as she said, I think in part, when is it, 3 or whatever? Oh, I was going to meet my son again, and then she realized like the guy is just all over the place, a complete mess, and something happened. So I think she realizes like that he's just someone other than who she was expecting to meet, and that they don't have this trust between them that he's going to tell her what's going to happen anyway. And also maybe that it might be for the better if she doesn't know exactly what's going on. But I think she, it's also probably the thing seems like she also kind of accepts it, but then again, probably doesn't have many options anyway.
Yeah, I wonder, it almost to me seemed like either she's like super naive and really puts him on a pedestal, or she just doesn't want to.
Oh yeah, that's true. Actually, in the last one, she still says like, you're going to be like a great lawyer or whatever, right? Yeah, that's true. She does say that. Yeah, I don't know. I read it as, I mean, she definitely knows that something's going on that's really bad, I think. But I mean, to be fair, if she says this to her son, it might be also like a last-ditch attempt to, I mean, maybe she recognizes that he has a real problem with being a very average person, and that maybe she's trying to like, boost his confidence or whatever. Don't know whether 19th century Russians were big in confidence boosting, but yeah. Okay. Or do you want to talk more about the mother?
No, that's all.
Okay, I have a question. Do you think Dostoevsky ever owned a watch?
Probably, maybe a pocket watch.
Because I don't know, 2 weeks ago or something, I saw on Reddit on Ask Reddit there was a question which is like something like, what's something in novels that really annoys you? And one person wrote, when people write something like, and then this person, and then they looked at each other for a minute. Do you know how long a minute is? Like, that's a really long time to stare at each other. And there's a lot of that in this part. For example, when, I can't remember, I think it's Svidrigailov and Raskolnikov, I think it's them two, they talk or something, and then they sit and look at each other for like 10 minutes or something. And then there's a few other points where people just stare at each other for a minute straight. And, I can't unsee it now.
I didn't pick this up.
Yeah, it's one of those things, I think, like, you just like overread it until you actually like think about like, look at someone and count down a minute. It's a long time.
Yeah,
people don't do that for that long. And they definitely, I think Porfir Petrovich and Raskolnikov just sit opposite each other for 10 minutes, I think it says, at some point, without saying anything. It's like, probably not though. So I'm wondering like whether I don't know how common like wristwatches were, or pocket watches or whatever. But I wouldn't be surprised if he never actually owned a watch. It was like, like, when you think something was like ages and it was only like 2 minutes or something. Yeah. I think there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah. Well, but then maybe he just wanted to exaggerate.
Well, I hope he did. Okay, so I have only really one main point I wrote down, which is my recurring, I should say, I've mentioned a few times just how much Raskolnikov doesn't have a conscience. And I think how he just doesn't care that he killed people or anything like that. Like he just doesn't have any remorse. And I think in this part, it emphasizes a lot more.
Yeah.
So first is, I think you mentioned this one earlier, page 621. He's talking to his sister. She hugged him close. And by going off to suffer, are you not already washing away half your crime? She cried, squeezing him in her arms and kissing him. Crime? What crime? He cried in a sudden surge of fury. I murdered a vile, noxious louse, some hag of a moneylender of no use to anyone, whose murder makes up for 40 sins, who sucked the juice from the poor, and that's a crime. I don't even think about it. I don't even think about washing it away. I don't care that you're all prodding me with your crime. Only now do I see the full absurdity of my petty cowardice. Now, when I've already decided to accept this pointless disgrace, I'm despicable and talentless. That's the only reason I've decided, and maybe also because it's in my own interests, as that man suggested, that Porphyry. Yeah, and then he goes on. I'll shorten this part, but then on 622 he says, this whole idea was nowhere near as stupid as it now seems in the light of failure. Everything seems stupid in the light of failure. All I wanted was to ensure my independence, to take the first step, to get what I needed and let the immeasurable benefits, relatively speaking, smooth everything over. But even the first step was too much for me to cope with, because I'm scum. And that's all there is to it, and I refuse to look at it your way. If I'd pulled it off, I'd have been crowned. Instead, I'm trapped. So as I said, no remorse there. So the first thing is, I think, so this is something, that I just wanted to extend something that we mentioned earlier, like the question maybe of whether Sonia is supposed to stand in for his conscience, or maybe she reminds him of it or something. I don't know. But like he, as I mentioned in previous parts, like he never thinks, as he says, he never thinks about the problem of what he did or something. He only thinks about, am I going to get caught? And that really upsets him. Maybe we'll talk about this more when we have like a general discussion, but I feel like he has this is not a book about morality and whether you should be allowed to do those things. I think he's just a narcissist or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but he just thinks he's better than everyone else and could do whatever he wants and has like no empathy or anything.
And I think it becomes very clear, because I think there have been some parts in the book where I wasn't sure whether he felt remorse or not, or whether he felt guilty. And it wasn't, to me at least, it wasn't so clear. But in the end, it really becomes clear. He's like, no, he's not. He doesn't feel sorry for anything he's done. Until to the very last moment where he turns around. I mean, we still don't know exactly what's going on inside of him, but something made him, seeing Sonia just made him turn around. Because she would have, like in theory, could have just walked past her. She wouldn't have been violent. She probably would have not told anybody, but something about her made him turn around.
Do you think that's the romantic, uplifting conclusion from this whole story? That love to a penniless prostitute who you can basically control, and where he can finally live out his sense of grandeur over someone else. Do you think that kind of love can make you
I don't think so.
Get a sense of conscience?
I don't even know whether, we don't really know whether he loves her, right? We know that she loves him, and maybe that is, seeing that she has absolutely no reason to love him, but she still does, makes him realize something, or it makes him, I don't know.
Or just he likes the power, right?
Yeah.
He has more money than her. I mean, not really more, but he's less desperate than she is in a way.
It's a slightly different topic, but what I'm surprised by is that not a single time came the things he's stolen. Nobody ever mentioned, he never went to look for it. So the money and...
Yeah, but they talk about it, right?
Yeah, they do talk about it, but he never considers going there and getting it. Or it's never really...
So, I mean, they know that it exists under some rock, right? I think Porfiry Petrovich says that, I think because Razumikin heard it or whatever, heard Raskolnikov say it when he was feverish and talking in his sleep or whatever. So I wonder whether maybe he just never went there also because he knew that if he went there, people might see him. And if he knows where is loot the correct word, is hidden, then that's basically evidence against him. But then again, as I said, that I'm kind of also disagreeing with that, because he could have thought it at least, and he never even thought it. You know, he could have thought like, oh, I should go there. No, I shouldn't do that because then I get caught. So, I mean, but that's kind of, don't they discuss this early on when they say like he didn't even kill her for the money, basically. He did it as a hobby. Yeah. I have, just going back briefly, last point to Raskolnikov being a terrible person. I present evidence number 500, which is... Okay, actually, this sounds slightly less bad than when I first read it. Raskolnikov and his sister are parting ways in the street or whatever. They walk away, she turns around, and he just gestures to her to leave, basically, and then he thinks, I'm being spied for, I can see it myself, he thought a minute later, ashamed of his petulant gesture towards Donia. But what must they love me so much if I don't deserve it? Oh, if only I'd been on my own and no one had loved me. This is the part now that I remembered. And I'd never loved anyone. None of this would have happened. I have to admit, when I first read this, I remembered this as him thinking like, oh, I'm too lovable. Like, I'm too loving, sorry. Like, I'm too caring. That's why I killed the murders. But now when I read it again, it doesn't sound quite as bad.
No, I don't think so. I think the way I understood it is that if he wouldn't have loved his mother and his sister, he most likely would have never committed the murder, because this was the final trigger.
Yeah, but that is the point though, right? You didn't kill her because you loved your mum. You killed her because, I don't know, something's really wrong with you and you don't mind killing old people if it suits you. You know, as I said in like part 2 or whatever, like, he never even considered like earning money another way other than killing an old woman. And then, as you just said, he never even took the money, right? He makes it seem as if it's like the whole problem is that he has and receives too much love, when the problem is that, I don't know, he seems to settle his problem by killing old women. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I do see what you mean, but I think in his mind, this is still some reason for why he's done it. Maybe he's just, in this moment, I think he's just telling him, oh, if I would have just been alone, I would have never done this, and like I wouldn't have felt the need to, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah,
but obviously that's not true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like kind of the point, like he's pretending he's better than he is.
Sure.
By number one saying like, this is the only circumstance in which this would have happened. And secondly, I'm too loved and loving. That's why I killed people. Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, the epilogue is like 40 pages or something, 30 pages. But it seems like it's kind of settled, right? It seems like everything's pretty clear to me. Like, he's confessed, he's going to get... I think they said either he's going to be executed or sent to Siberia.
Yeah.
Zonya's going to, in whatever capacity, going to join him in Siberia if he goes there. Mikolai's, it's a big question why he confessed in the first place to a crime he obviously didn't do. Svidrigailov's, half the people are actually dead already. Svidrigailov's dead. Obviously the 2 women are dead. Marmeladov is dead. His wife's dead. The children, Zonya's step-siblings or whatever, they're in this orphanage, which apparently is amazing. At least that's the way Svidrigailov sells it. Seems like everything's pretty much, I don't know, the sister mother probably gonna, I don't know, what do you think? They're just gonna return home? Or she's gonna marry Razumikin?
I think they're gonna stay in St. Petersburg. I think they've changed, at least the sister's changed. But I think she would go back and try to resume her old life.
You don't think she would do that?
No, I don't think so.
Do you think she's going to get a new haircut to symbolize her personal change?
Probably. Highlights. But I think she will stay with Razumikin. I think that seems like a good match.
Yeah, he seems alright. He seems to have, when he wants more money, he doesn't go, I should murder old ladies, but he thinks, I should translate. I mean, he's also kind of frauding people because he says, I don't even speak German or whatever, and translates stuff anyway. So in a way, he's not exactly doing things properly either. But it seems definitely a step up from very boring and calculating Lucin from murderous Svidrigailov and whatever else. Porfir Petrovich hopefully gets a raise. I like him now.
Yeah, but I think everything it's just going to be, I expect only like a conclusion of things rather than
exactly.
Any.
It's probably going to be like 20 years later and everything was, and then it's like a fairy tale and everyone lived happily ever after. Everything resolved itself.
But I wonder whether there might be some hint to whether he actually regrets or whether he now feels guilty for the murder or whether he purely turned around because he saw Sonia and I don't know. Like what, maybe there's going to be some, does he actually feel it now? Does he feel guilty or was it just because he doesn't want to disappoint Sonia?
I wouldn't be surprised if he spends the last chapter in Siberia going, oh, fucking Sonia made me confess I hate her. It really wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Number 1, who ruined his life? Actually, fun fact, always women. Number 1, it was his sister for going to marry that stupid Lucin. Number 2, it's whatever her name is, the pawnbroker for having all this money and being mean. Number 3, I wouldn't be surprised if it's now her.
Yeah.
If it's now Sonia for making him confess.
Interesting.
We'll see.
Wow.